as I understand from the proposal that has been made, is that the purpose of the curfew is to gather information on a temporary basis between February 1st and the end of June to determine whether or not this temporary curfew should continue. In other words, to gather evidence to prove or to establish that there's a need for a curfew. My argument before was, no, you're supposed to go do that discovery and collect that evidence beforehand to show here is the need and why it's the need, etc.
To be clear, you were not a fan of this idea, correct?
Correct. But I'm not a fan, but in the overall, my argument before was, no, you're supposed to go do that discovery and collect that evidence beforehand to show here is the need and why it's the need, etc.
To be clear, you were not a fan of this idea, correct?
Correct.
Just to remind everybody.
But I'm not a fan, but in the overall context, I'm in some ways glad that it was brought, because out of the bringing of it and the public comment and our ability to talk with students at Maces Lane Middle School and Cambridge South Dorchester, we got a lot of good information about the kids and what they want and about the needs. And the local management board, through Moving Dorchester Forward, is pulling together a collaborative group of agencies and agency providers to start looking at what the needs are for kids and how to get them services. As a result of that, for instance, curfew, there's not going to be, as I understand it, an immediate referral to criminal prosecution against mom or dad. It's going to be, here's the information, let's give it to this collaborative group, mental health, social services, Department of Juvenile Services, et cetera, local management board, and get all the information that's available about the family to see what is the problem. Because violation of curfew, just like truancies, staying out late, is simply an outward manifestation of behavior. Something's going wrong in the home. Parent doesn't have control, child doesn't want to be at home for some reason, drugs, domestic violence, whatever the case may be, or they just want to go hang with the guys who were the bad guys in town.
So we're not talking about writing tickets or pulling kids into the police station late at night. We're talking about being able to contact their parents and then presumably bring resources to bear on whatever the family problem is. Is that right?
Well, almost. They can take the child to the police department under the statute or under the ordinance. But what the police officer is supposed to do is get the information, if they know the parent or can get the information from the child or somebody, call the parent and see if the parent will come pick them up. Or if the parent is not available, is there a neighbor, a friend, a relative who would come and pick the child up? If that is not possible, then under the statute, as I recall it, they can take him to the police department and then would try to find the contact of the parent or the adult that would come and get the child. But they're not going to lock the child up. They're not going to put him in a cell or anything like that.
We're not talking about on February 1st we're going to start doing police dragnets late at night and calling in underage kids.
No, what they're really doing or will be doing is developing the policy and procedure to implement the ordinance. And what I was trying to do was to get that policy and procedure put in the ordinance so that we understood who was doing what and how the process would work. So the police department, the police chief is working on that with staff to get that in place so that it may, I don't know, but it may not be ready on February 1st. And maybe all they'll do is simply stop the child and talk to him and get some information and let him go. All of that has to be put together so that it may not be March 1st before it's ready.
I know in the debate about imposing a curfew on young people or underage, is under 17 or under 16?
No, it's under 16.
Under 16. As part of the debate, I believe you raised the specter of potential litigation if these police actions might be challenged by the ACLU or whatever, or some other kind of civil rights organization. Do you think that the specter that came
Well,
to your face?
all I can tell you is that the ACLU at several meetings that I was at have said that they plan to file suit, but people often say we're going to file suit and then don't. They may look at it and say, oh, it's a temporary thing. We'll wait. So I have no idea if they will or won't. The general issue is there are probably in Cambridge close to 2,000 children who are between the ages of 11 and 17. So maybe say 1,000 would be 15 and under. Are we really are we going to restrict all of their rights for an unknown number of children who are out there constantly night after night after night? And is that number 2 or 5 or 10 or 100? We don't know. And I'm not privy to what those discussions are at the police department about how they plan to implement this. I mean, I've expressed my view as to how it should be implemented, but that view was not adopted by City Council. So,
What was the input generally that you were getting from the Black community about this? Because let's face it, I mean, a lot of this is going to come to bear on young Black men in the city of Cambridge. What has been is there any consensus that you sense in the Black community, or are opinions split as with any other group of people?
well, there certainly isn't. There's not consensus. I mean, there's certainly a difference of opinion. I felt a very strong position being, don't implement it because it's not going to work, and you may be picking on the Black community here. But again, we go back to it's the purpose of it, as was it stated to me and was stated at the City Council meetings, is to gather evidence. So at this juncture, we don't know, except for what we may think. We don't know where this curfew violations where they're going to take place. Now, I think they will be in a certain part of town, but the curfews applies to the whole town. And as an officer, in the historic district, going to stop a child as he might or she might on Greenwood Avenue? I don't know. I mean, if they do, if they don't stop one and stop the other, then I think the ACLU is going to be filing that lawsuit, because that's discrimination in that circumstance that shouldn't be, because it ought to, if it's going to apply, it applies to the whole city.
Well, it's interesting. It seems to me if it's going to work the way some people contemplate it will, which is it's a temporary measure to gather information, do some research. In a strange sense, this is an example of maybe turning police officers into social workers, which is a part of a national debate about whether or not police work should be more closely integrated to social work. It seems like in a way we're doing that here. We're trying that here in Cambridge.
Well, I think it may be that they are referring children to social workers and to therapists or whatever, and I think that's a good thing. I found when I was on the bench, once you get a child into the court system, the likelihood is that they get deeper and deeper and deeper into the system. So it is far better to where you meet a child, come across a child in a circumstance that is not appropriate for them, or where they're violating the law, to divert them out of the system. And I think the police officers are right at the forefront of that. They can divert. The question historically in my past life was, do they divert and refer, or do they just divert? I mean, so many kids who got stopped for drinking beer or driving with beer in the car, and the answer was pour the beer out and let them go. Well, that's, to me, is not the answer. The answer is pour it out, but call the parents and say, I stopped your son, just wanted to let you know why, so that the parent can then take some action about the behavior. Or if it's a second or third time referral, send it to an agency to see what's going on there. And before we go after the $20 million or whatever, we look at what's in the resources, some of the ARPA money. We have just passed, or City Council just passed legislation to increase the water and sewer fees starting in July and then next July. And that will pay for, those increased fees will pay for the additional costs that may come from any bonds that we have to go out and seek. In addition, the state is very much aware of the needs of Cambridge and the Department of Housing and Community Development, the other departments escape me right now, but that deal with water and sewer we're looking at what funds they might have available, either as grants or as low interest loans or no interest loans or forgiven loans over periods of time. And the combination of all of those, plus the work that Larry White and the Cambridge Shoreline Resilience Project is doing, and its efforts to get about $20 million from MEMA, the Maryland Emergency Management, would, if they are successful, that will be a big step towards the stormwater runoff, the sewer flooding and going into the chop tank, that sort of thing, which is absolutely critical that we get some control over. So I see significant possibilities through a variety of things, some of which are going to be the extra $10 that we're going to be paying on our water bill toward the loans is what we're going to, is how it's going to be done.
That's one $20 million. There's another $20 million, which is the Shoreline Restoration Project. Those are two separate projects, correct?
Yes and no. See, there, as part of the Shoreline Resilience Project, stormwater runoff is a piece of that. And where we wind up with problems here is the stormwater gets into the system, it overflows the system, it then gets where we have the sewer and the stormwater systems are not absolutely separated.
Right.
We have the flooding into one, which then floods back into the chop tank.
But are these two different pots of money we're talking about?
Well, they certainly are two separate pots of money, but okay. Some may be used for some of the needs in that are the same needs for the city. For instance, stormwater overflow and runoff.
And you mentioned that over the next year and a half or 2 years, residents of the city of Cambridge are going to see about a $10 increase in their bill, the bill that we pay monthly to the Municipal Utilities Commission.
I think it's about that, yeah.
Yeah, I think from the average now of about something like $52 or something like that, it'll be $62 and change, something like that. My question is, how much of that is going to make up the needed 20 million? In other words, how much of this 20 million for the sewer separation piece of this is going to be flipped in by the city residents, and how much of it is coming from outside sources or bonds or what have you?
I don't know the exact number, but I mean the general ballpark of what I think are going to be loans is in the $2 or $3 million range. But also, as part of this, is it's not just residents; it's also businesses that are going to be paying for for their water usage. And there are some here that pay a substantial amount of money on a monthly basis, more than the $53 or $62 that will.
Right. Yeah, I was referring to a typical residential bill, I guess.
Yeah.
Yes. Right.
Well, I'm not I'm not the evaluator here, but I mean the city manager, city council are in terms of continuing the contract. The real focus that he has, which I think is absolutely necessary, is the community policing. We are down 10 or 11 officers, the last count I had. So we really need to bring the community into being a partner with the police department. The community doesn't have to be the police. The police have to do that, but there has to be relationship building in order that a level of trust between community and police improves. I know from when I was on the board of Moving Dorchester Forward, I resigned here a few weeks ago simply because of I felt I was getting into a conflict between my mayor responsibilities and the Moving Dorchester Forward responsibilities. But when we were developing Moving Dorchester Forward, and we would have our meetings, the small meetings of our group, what came up time after time after time was the community does not trust police, government, you name it. And as a result, we started to look at how do we help to develop that trust. And we started to with getting parents more engaged regarding their children's education and whatnot. And quite frankly, it would apply to the curfew as well. If we can have an engaged parent, they can then be the stopgap between the police department and that child who may be out too late or may be home because mom and dad have made the right decision about getting them home. So the police department still have to make the arrest and do the prosecution and all that sort of stuff. And the community has to step up and say, okay, this is our community. This is our neighborhood. This is what we want. And it's not just what, in my view, oh, what can the city give us? Oh, we're going to get more cameras. Oh, we're going to get better lighting. Sure, if it's needed, the city needs to do that. But at the same time, the community has to say, okay, we're not going to put up with bad behavior in the streets or children who are sassing, their elders or whatever. And they need to be, the parents in the community need to be part of taking back the streets. They don't need to be out there, fighting and where it's dangerous with guns and that sort of thing. But at the same time, they can't just turn it over to the police and say, you all take care of it. Because if they do, it's not going to work.
Is there going to be any kind of public education component to this
yes.
curfew? Because, how do people know? Are kids going to be informed in school or what?
The police chief has plans not only for the curfew, but for the community policing in terms of, and they're developing them, but in other words, of getting out into the community and helping the citizens understand what's to be expected. But it's also about police officers getting out of their cars and walking a neighborhood and doing nothing but just having conversations and getting to know people rather than driving by, because the driving by, that just separated or would continue to separate the police from the community. I'm excited about the real. It's a really a great opportunity, and what I see too as part of all of this is, with our agencies starting to get into solving some of these problems with children. I'm talking with the school system about the truancy problem and how we can try to come up with a solution there. We start doing that kind of thing. What I see is that instead of being a totally reactive force, the police department, then that will start to eat away at the people who are coming here, who are the criminals. You look at the deaths that we've had here.
Shooting
and
deaths.
it's a significant increase, but it's something that is, I think, able to be controlled. But it's half of them are from outside. I mean, it isn't Cambridge people killing Cambridge people, all of it.
It's people from bigger cities around here.
Yeah,
DC,
and that's
Baltimore,
drug,
Philly.
and that's and that's people dealing drugs or using, having fights about whose turf it is and all that. And the police department, is just not able to, certainly with its size, to dig its way into those groups to find out who's doing what. But I tell you, the police department, the sheriff's office, and the state police are doing an absolutely terrific job of catching the people that are doing this.
Do all our schools here in Dorchester County have truancy officers? Like when I was a kid, if you didn't go to school, somebody called your parents. If your parents hadn't called and said, little Kevy is sick today, he's not coming in. If they didn't see me, they called my parents. Does that still happen, or is that?
I have not heard of that. I mean, I'm sure there are people that may be tasked with that at the school's administrative office. But I know there are school resource officers, and we probably ought to have more of them. Officer LaMonica is doing a fabulous job at Maces Lane. The calls to the police department from last year to this year, when she started this year, have gone down dramatically. She's really in there getting to know the kids. She talked at a meeting, and interestingly, the gun violence meeting that we had on the 10th, about
January.
of kids wanting to learn how to problem solve with other kids, and so that we aren't always in each other's face.
Are you talking about developing conflict resolution skills?
Yeah, and I'm on the board of Midshore Community Mediation Center, which does that. They have a contract with the schools, so I was able to connect them with her, and they've been connected in the past, but to get back and maybe be able to provide some services there for kids. So it's a little bit of, it's touching more bases in the school, in the community, being prevention oriented, which is clearly the solution here, and not being a reactive system, which we have been, not just the police, but the child welfare and child serving agencies.